Dr. Sarah Chen had always believed that her hands were meant to save lives, not take them. As the morning sun cast long shadows across the military compound in Afghanistan, she carefully packed her medical supplies into the tactical bag that had become as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. The weight of responsibility sat heavy on her shoulders as she prepared for what seemed like another routine mission with SEAL Team 7. The briefing room buzzed with quiet intensity as Commander Jake Morrison outlined their objective. Intelligence had located a high-value target in a remote village compound, suspected of coordinating attacks against coalition forces. Sarah's role was clear and simple: provide medical support for the team and treat any civilians who might be caught in the crossfire. She had done this dozens of times before, always staying in the background while the warriors did their work. Lieutenant Ryan Ghost Matthews, the team's sniper, gave Sarah a reassuring nod as they geared up. They had worked together for 8 months now, and he had seen her steady hands work miracles under pressure. She had pulled him back from the brink after an IED explosion had left him with severe shrapnel wounds. The trust between them was absolute, forged in the crucible of combat medicine. As their helicopter lifted off from the base, Sarah reviewed her emergency protocols once more. The village they were heading to had been under Taliban control for weeks, and intelligence suggested the presence of foreign fighters who had been training local militants. The mission was expected to be straightforward: fast insertion, target acquisition, and extraction within 2 hours. The landscape below shifted from brown desert to green patches of cultivated land as they approached the target zone. Sarah could see the village nestled in a valley, its mud brick buildings clustered around a central marketplace. Smoke rose from cooking fires, a peaceful scene that belied the danger lurking within those walls. She had learned to read these moments of calm before the storm, knowing that everything could change in an instant. The helicopter touched down in a clearing 2 kilometers from the village, and the team moved out in practiced formation. Sarah stayed in the middle of the group, her medical bag secured across her chest, her sidearm ready but unused. She had qualified expert with her pistol during training, but had never fired a shot in anger. Her weapon was for absolute last resort, a tool she hoped never to need. As they approached the village perimeter, the team's communications specialist picked up unusual radio chatter. The target compound was more heavily defended than expected, with at least 15 armed fighters instead of the anticipated 5 or 6. Commander Morrison made the call to proceed, confident in his team's abilities and the element of surprise they still maintained. The first phase went according to plan. The SEALs moved like shadows through the narrow alleyways, neutralizing sentries with silent efficiency. Sarah followed, her eyes scanning for civilians who might need immediate medical attention. The village seemed eerily quiet, as if the residents sensed the approaching storm and had taken shelter. Everything changed when they reached the target building. As Ghost took position on a nearby rooftop to provide overwatch, the rest of the team prepared to breach the main entrance. Sarah positioned herself in a doorway across the street, her medical station ready to receive casualties. She had no idea that within the next few minutes, everything she thought she knew about herself would be turned upside down. The compound erupted in gunfire as the SEALs encountered unexpected resistance. What should have been a quick raid turned into a fierce firefight as enemy reinforcements poured in from surrounding buildings. Sarah pressed herself against the wall, her heart pounding as bullets whined overhead. This was heavier resistance than anything she had experienced before. Commander Morrison's voice crackled through her earpiece, calling for immediate medical assistance. Sergeant Tommy Rodriguez had taken a round to the shoulder and was losing blood fast. Sarah grabbed her trauma kit and sprinted across the street under covering fire, her training taking over despite the chaos around her. She had work to do, lives to save, and that was all that mattered in this moment of crisis. Sarah's hands moved with practiced precision as she worked on Sergeant Rodriguez's shoulder wound, the sound of gunfire creating a deadly symphony around them. The bullet had missed the major arteries, but the bleeding was significant. She applied pressure while preparing a field dressing, her movements calm despite the chaos erupting just meters away from their position behind a crumbling stone wall. The situation deteriorated rapidly as more enemy fighters emerged from hidden positions throughout the village. What intelligence had described as a small cell turned out to be a major staging area for a planned offensive. The SEALs found themselves outnumbered 3-1, fighting for their lives in the narrow confines of the village streets. Ghost's voice came through clearly on the radio from his overwatch position. Multiple hostiles moving in from the north and east. I count at least 20 fighters, possibly more. They're trying to flank our position. His sniper rifle cracked methodically as he picked off targets. But even his deadly accuracy couldn't stem the tide of approaching enemies. Commander Morrison made the tactical decision to fall back to a more defensible position, but their exit route was quickly cut off by enemy fighters who had circled around behind them. Sarah finished stabilizing Rodriguez just as word came that they were effectively surrounded. The nearest extraction point was now under heavy enemy fire, and their helicopter was taking ground fire that prevented immediate pickup. The team took shelter in a partially destroyed building at the center of the village, establishing a defensive perimeter while calling for backup. Sarah continued treating Rodriguez while monitoring the radio chatter that painted an increasingly grim picture. Reinforcements were at least 30 minutes away, and their ammunition was running low after the intense initial firefight. As the enemy tightened their circle, Ghost reported disturbing intelligence gathered from intercepted communications. The fighters weren't just local Taliban. They included foreign trainers and bomb makers who had been using the village as a base for planning attacks on coalition forces. The team had stumbled into something much larger than anyone had anticipated. The building they occupied had once been a school, its walls decorated with children's drawings that now seemed hauntingly out of place amid the violence. Sarah set up her medical station in what had been a classroom, using desks as improvised barriers. The irony wasn't lost on her. A place meant for learning and growth had become a battlefield, where survival was the only lesson that mattered. Rodriguez was stable but weak from blood loss, and Sarah knew he wouldn't be able to fight effectively if they had to move quickly. Lieutenant Mike Hawk Patterson had taken shrapnel to his leg from a grenade that had exploded near their position during the retreat. She worked to extract the metal fragments while keeping one ear on the tactical communications flowing between the team members. The enemy began probing their defenses with small groups of fighters, testing for weak points in their perimeter. Each attack was repelled, but it cost precious ammunition and revealed their positions to the encroaching forces. Sarah could see the strain on the faces of the SEALs as they realized this might not be a mission they would walk away from. Commander Morrison gathered his team leaders for a quick strategy session, while Sarah continued her medical work. The options were limited, and none of them good. They could try to fight their way to the extraction point, but that would mean crossing open ground under heavy fire while carrying wounded teammates. They could wait for reinforcements, but their ammunition situation was becoming critical. As if reading their thoughts, the enemy launched a coordinated assault on their position from 3 directions simultaneously. The building shook under the impact of rocket-propelled grenades, and dust filled the air as chunks of concrete rained down from the ceiling. Sarah shielded her patients with her own body, feeling the sharp bite of debris against her back. The firefight that followed was unlike anything Sarah had experienced in her 8 months of deployment. The enemy fighters showed a level of coordination and tactical awareness that spoke to professional training. They used covering fire and movement techniques that matched what she had seen from Coalition Special Operations Forces, making every defensive action a deadly game of chess. Ghost's ammunition was running critically low, forcing him to choose his shots with even greater care. Each round had to count as the enemy pressed closer to their building. His calm voice on the radio provided updates on enemy movements, but Sarah could hear the underlying tension as their situation became increasingly desperate. The walls of their makeshift fortress began to crumble under sustained enemy fire. Sarah realized with growing alarm that their defensive position was becoming untenable. The children's artwork on the walls seemed to watch over them like silent witnesses to the violence that had invaded their peaceful space. A reminder of the innocence that war inevitably destroys. The explosion that changed everything came without warning. A rocket-propelled grenade punched through the eastern wall of their defensive position, detonating with devastating force in the adjacent room. The blast wave threw Sarah against the far wall, her ears ringing and vision blurred as debris rained down around her wounded patients. When the dust cleared, she saw the horrifying truth. The explosion had collapsed part of the roof, creating a gaping hole that exposed their position to enemy fire from multiple angles. Worse yet, the blast had severed their communications with Ghost, whose overwatch position on the nearby rooftop had been targeted by a concentrated rocket attack. Commander Morrison's voice cut through the chaos with grim authority. Ghost is down. Building collapsed. We're on our own until reinforcements arrive. The words hit the team like a physical blow. Their guardian angel, the deadly accurate sniper who had been keeping the enemy at bay, was buried somewhere in the rubble of a building 200 meters away. Sarah's medical training kicked in as she assessed the new casualties from the blast. Corporal James Bear Wilson had taken significant shrapnel to his chest and was struggling to breathe. She could see the telltale signs of a pneumothorax. His lung had been punctured and was collapsing. Without immediate intervention, he would die within minutes. Working with hands that refused to shake despite the circumstances, Sarah prepared for an emergency needle decompression. She had performed the procedure in field hospitals but never under direct enemy fire. As bullets whined overhead and concrete chips rained down around them, she inserted the needle between Bear's ribs, releasing the trapped air that was crushing his lung. The procedure worked, and Bear's breathing improved dramatically, but Sarah knew it was only a temporary fix. He needed surgical intervention that she couldn't provide in their current situation. She stabilized him as best she could while enemy fighters continued their relentless assault on their crumbling position. Lieutenant Patterson, despite his own leg wound, took command of the eastern defensive position where the wall had been breached. His rifle barked repeatedly as enemy fighters attempted to exploit the gap in their defenses. Sarah could see the strain on his face as he fought through the pain of his injuries, knowing that any weakness in their perimeter could mean death for them all. The ammunition situation became critical as the sustained firefight continued. Each SEAL was down to his last few magazines, and Sarah realized with growing horror that they might soon be reduced to fighting with knives and bare hands. The enemy seemed to have an endless supply of fighters and ammunition, suggesting this was indeed a major staging area for terrorist operations. Rodriguez, despite his shoulder wound, dragged himself to a window position and began returning fire with his sidearm. His rifle had been damaged in the blast, but his fighting spirit remained unbroken. Sarah watched these warriors continue to fight despite their wounds, and knew she was witnessing something extraordinary. The kind of courage and determination that defined the special operations community. The enemy launched another coordinated assault, this time bringing up heavy machine guns that raked their position with sustained fire. The remaining walls of the classroom began to disintegrate under the onslaught, and Sarah knew they had minutes before their defensive position became completely untenable. It was then that she heard it. The distinctive crack of a high-powered rifle from the direction of Ghost's last known position. The sound was faint but unmistakable, and it was followed by the sudden silence of one of the enemy machine guns. Hope flickered in Sarah's chest as she realized their sniper might still be alive and fighting, but the hope was short-lived. The rifle fire was sporadic and seemed to lack Ghost's usual precision. Either he was badly wounded or his equipment was damaged, because the deadly accuracy that had made him legendary among the SEAL community was noticeably absent. The enemy machine gun resumed firing after only a brief pause. Commander Morrison made the decision that would define the rest of the mission. Their position was no longer defensible, and staying would mean certain death for his entire team. They had to move, and they had to do it now, despite their wounded and the overwhelming enemy presence surrounding them. Sarah looked at her patients, Rodriguez with his damaged shoulder, Patterson with shrapnel in his leg, and Bear with his chest wound that could prove fatal if stressed too severely. Moving them under fire would be incredibly dangerous, but staying was certain suicide. She began preparing emergency field dressings and pain medication that would allow the wounded to function during their desperate escape attempt. The irony of her situation wasn't lost on her. She had spent months patching up these warriors after their battles, but now she would have to trust them to protect her as they fought their way out of an impossible situation. The traditional roles of protector and protected were about to be tested in ways none of them had ever imagined. As enemy fighters prepared for what appeared to be a final assault on their position, Sarah made a silent promise to herself and her patients. She would do whatever it took to get them out alive, even if it meant abandoning everything she thought she knew about herself and her role as a healer. Sometimes, she realized, saving lives required taking them. The moment of transformation came as the enemy launched their final assault. Sarah was applying a fresh bandage to Bear's chest wound when she saw movement through the destroyed eastern wall. 3 fighters advancing with assault rifles, moving with the confidence of men who believed victory was assured. Behind them, she could see more shapes in the shadows, positioning themselves for the kill. Commander Morrison was coordinating defensive fire from the northern position when he took a bullet through the thigh. He went down hard, his rifle clattering across the debris-strewn floor as blood began pooling beneath him. In that instant, Sarah realized with crystal clarity that her medical training, while crucial, would not be enough to save these men who had become her brothers in arms. Lieutenant Patterson was overwhelmed at his position, trying to cover two angles of attack with a damaged leg that could barely support his weight. Rodriguez, fighting with only his sidearm, was down to his last magazine. Bear, despite Sarah's treatment, was growing weaker by the minute and could barely hold his rifle steady. The mathematics of their situation were brutally simple. 5 wounded warriors against more than a dozen healthy enemy fighters, with ammunition running critically low and no hope of immediate reinforcement. Traditional military doctrine would classify their situation as hopeless, but Sarah had learned that SEAL teams didn't believe in hopeless situations. She grabbed Commander Morrison's fallen rifle, a weapon she had trained with but never fired in combat. The familiar weight felt different now, heavier somehow, as if the metal itself understood the gravity of what was about to happen. Her medical bag slipped from her shoulder as she took position near the breach in the eastern wall. The first enemy fighter who appeared in the gap never saw her coming. Sarah's shot took him center mass, the impact spinning him around and dropping him instantly. The rifle's recoil surprised her with its violence, but her hands remained steady as she acquired her next target. Years of precision work as a surgeon had given her the fine motor control that made the difference between life and death. The second fighter was more cautious, using the rubble for cover as he tried to flank their position. Sarah waited patiently, controlling her breathing as Ghost had taught her during their quiet conversations about marksmanship. When the fighter exposed himself to take a shot at Patterson, Sarah was ready. Her bullet found its mark with surgical precision. Patterson looked at her with amazement and renewed determination. The sight of their medic taking the fight to the enemy seemed to energize the entire team. Rodriguez found new strength in his wounded arm, and even Bear managed to prop himself up and return accurate fire despite his chest wound. Sarah moved through the ruined classroom with a calm efficiency that surprised even her. Each shot was calculated and deliberate, each movement purposeful. The hands that had saved countless lives were now taking them with the same precise skill, and she felt no hesitation or remorse. These men had come to kill her patients, her team, her family. The enemy fighters began to realize they were facing something unexpected. What should have been a simple mop-up operation against wounded soldiers had turned into a deadly encounter with a marksman whose accuracy was unnerving. Sarah's shots were finding targets at ranges that should have been impossible for someone firing an unfamiliar rifle in combat conditions. Commander Morrison, despite his leg wound, managed to drag himself to a radio that had been damaged, but still functional. His calls for immediate air support took on new urgency as he watched his medic systematically eliminate enemy fighters with a skill that rivaled his most experienced operators. The turning point came when Sarah spotted an enemy machine gun team setting up to rake their position with sustained fire. The crew was partially concealed behind a low wall, confident in their protection. Sarah studied the position for long seconds, calculating angles and distances with the same analytical precision she brought to complex medical procedures. Her shot shattered the machine gunner's scope, sending glass fragments into his eyes and face. As he recoiled in pain and surprise, Sarah's second shot found his partner, the ammunition bearer who was trying to take over the weapon. The machine gun threat was eliminated with 2 perfectly placed rounds that demonstrated a level of tactical thinking that impressed even these veteran warriors. Ghost's voice suddenly crackled over the radio. Weak but determined. He had managed to dig himself out of the rubble and was requesting target information from his new position. Sarah quickly relayed the locations of enemy fighters she could observe, her medical training helping her provide clear and accurate descriptions of wounds and tactical positions. The coordinated fire from Ghost's sniper rifle and Sarah's precise shooting began to turn the tide of the engagement. Enemy fighters who had moments before been confident of victory now found themselves caught in crossfire from 2 marksmen whose accuracy was devastating their ranks. Sarah felt a strange sense of completion as she worked. The same focus and attention to detail that made her an exceptional surgeon now made her a formidable combatant. Every shot was a problem to be solved, every target a challenge requiring the perfect application of knowledge and skill. As the immediate threat diminished, Sarah looked around at her wounded teammates and realized what had happened. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, transforming from healer to warrior in the span of minutes. The woman who had sworn an oath to do no harm had killed multiple enemy fighters to protect her patients, and she felt no conflict about that decision. The silence that followed the firefight was almost as intense as the battle itself. Sarah lowered her rifle and immediately returned to her medical duties, checking on Bear's breathing and ensuring that Commander Morrison's leg wound hadn't worsened during the engagement. Her hands, which had been rock steady while taking lives, now showed the slightest tremor as she resumed her role as a healer. Ghost's voice came over the radio with a strength that belied his earlier dire situation. All clear from Overwatch. Counting 12 enemy Kia. No movement detected in surrounding area. There was a pause before he added, "Doc, I watched you work through my scope. That was some of the finest shooting I've ever witnessed under combat conditions." The helicopter bearing their extraction team arrived 20 minutes later, its rotors kicking up dust clouds that obscured the village where so much had changed in such a short time. Sarah helped load her wounded teammates onto stretchers, her mind already shifting to the medical care they would need during transport back to the field hospital. As they lifted off from the landing zone, Commander Morrison reached out and grasped Sarah's hand with surprising strength. His eyes held a respect and understanding that went deeper than words. "What you did back there," he said quietly, "saved all our lives. You became something more than a medic today. You became one of us." The flight back to base gave Sarah time to process what had happened. She had taken 7 confirmed lives during the firefight, each shot necessary and justified, but still a fundamental change from everything she had believed about herself. The Hippocratic oath she had taken as a doctor seemed to exist in a different world from the reality of combat, where sometimes the only way to preserve life was to take it. Ghost was waiting for them at the medical facility, his left arm in a sling and a bandage covering a gash on his forehead. Despite his injuries, he had insisted on being present when they arrived. As Sarah supervised the transfer of her patients to the emergency room, he approached her with something she had never seen in his eyes before. Professional recognition between equals. "I counted your shots," Ghost said simply. 7 rounds fired, 7 targets eliminated. No ammunition wasted. No unnecessary risks taken. You fought like you've been doing it for years, but with a precision that comes from understanding anatomy and physiology in ways most of us never will. The medical team took over care of her patients, and Sarah finally had a moment to sit down and truly comprehend what had transpired. Bear would make a full recovery thanks to her emergency treatment and the surgical team's quick work. Rodriguez would regain full use of his shoulder with physical therapy. Patterson's leg wound would heal cleanly with no permanent damage. Commander Morrison would be back on active duty within 6 weeks. Over the following days, as the team recovered from their wounds, an unspoken understanding developed among them. What Sarah had done was more than just providing covering fire or defending herself. She had made a conscious decision to cross the line from healer to warrior, and she had done so with a skill and determination that earned their deepest respect. The official after-action report would list her contributions in dry, clinical language that failed to capture the reality of what had occurred. But among the members of SEAL Team 7, her actions would be spoken of with the kind of reverence reserved for legendary moments of heroism and brotherhood. Lieutenant Patterson, during his recovery, would tell anyone who would listen about watching their medic transform into a precision marksman who saved their lives. "She didn't just fight," he would say. "She became something we'd never seen before. A warrior who understood exactly how to stop a human being as efficiently as she understood how to save one." Ghost requested permission to work with Sarah on advanced marksmanship training, recognizing in her a natural talent that could be developed into something truly exceptional. "She has the steadiest hands and the calmest mind under pressure I've ever encountered," he wrote in his recommendation. "Her medical training gives her an understanding of human anatomy that makes her shooting incredibly precise and effective." Commander Morrison's final entry in the mission log would become part of SEAL Team 7's permanent history. Hospital Corpsman Chen demonstrated exceptional courage and tactical proficiency during enemy contact. Her transition from medical support to direct combat engagement was executed with professional skill and deadly accuracy. Her actions were instrumental in the successful completion of our mission and the survival of our team. The transformation was complete, but it came with an understanding that would stay with Sarah for the rest of her career. She remained first and foremost a healer, someone dedicated to preserving life and alleviating suffering. But she now also understood that sometimes those same skills and that same dedication required her to take life in order to save it. Years later, when new medics joined the teams and heard the stories about the day their legendary corpsman became a marksman, they would listen with the kind of awe reserved for myths and legends. But for the members of SEAL Team 7 who were there that day, it was simply the moment they realized that their medic was exactly the kind of warrior they needed, someone who could save their lives in any way necessary. The village in Afghanistan would be secured by reinforcements and turned into a forward operating base. The terrorist cell that had been operating there was completely eliminated, their plans for future attacks discovered and prevented. But for Sarah Chen and the members of SEAL Team 7, the real victory was simpler and more profound. They had all come home alive. And they had done so because when the moment demanded it, a healer had become a marksman, and 5 brothers in arms had witnessed something they would never forget.